The Observer Effect by Peter Lamb. Chapter 1, The Notebook. Elena Brooke had always been a creature of careful observation, even before the accident changed everything. Now, 3 months after waking from her coma, she sat at her kitchen table with a fresh composition notebook, its black and white marbled cover pristine except for the careful lettering she'd added. Night Journal, Private. The pen felt foreign in her fingers as she dated the first page, October 15th, 2:47 a.m. Outside her terraced house on Millfield Road, the suburb of Whitmore slept beneath a canopy of sodium streetlights, each one casting its amber pool onto empty pavements. She'd been awake for hours, not from insomnia but from something far stranger, a pulling sensation that seemed to emanate from just behind her sternum, as if her chest contained a fishing line being slowly reeled in. First attempt, she wrote, pausing to steady her handwriting. The sensation is strongest when I'm completely relaxed, like sinking into warm water, but in reverse, floating up instead of down. She'd tried to explain it to Dr. Reeves during her last follow-up appointment. How did you describe the feeling of your consciousness becoming untethered, of suddenly viewing your own body from above, like a discarded coat? He'd nodded with the practiced patience of a man who'd heard every variety of post-trauma delusion, then adjusted her medication dosage. But this wasn't a delusion. Elena was certain of that now. She closed her eyes and let her breathing deepen, focusing on that strange internal tug. The kitchen around her, the humming refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the distant hum of the motorway, began to feel less immediate. Her body grew heavy against the wooden chair, while something essential within her grew lighter. There, the moment of separation felt like stepping out of clothes made of lead. Elena opened her eyes, or thought she did, and found herself looking down at her own sleeping form slumped over the notebook. Her physical body's chest rose and fell in slow, peaceful rhythm. Dark hair spilled across her arms like spilled ink. From this ethereal vantage point, her kitchen looked different. The shadows fell at impossible angles, and the wallpaper seemed to breathe with subtle movement. She could move through this space with mere intention, drifting like smoke through the rooms of her small house. The walls offered no resistance. She passed through them as easily as stepping through doorways. Outside, Millfield Road stretched before her in perfect silence. No car engines, no footsteps, no distant televisions bleeding through thin walls. Just the quiet hum of electrical transformers and the whisper of wind through empty branches. She floated higher until the rooftops of her neighbors spread below her like a patchwork quilt.
From up here, she could see into windows that daylight never revealed. Mrs. Chen from number 47 sat in her darkened living room, perfectly still, staring at a blank television screen. The Hendersons' teenage daughter paced her bedroom in endless circles, her mouth moving in what looked like silent conversation with someone invisible. Elena drifted lower, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name. In the house directly across from hers, a light burned in the upstairs window. She'd never seen that room illuminated before, had always assumed it was unused storage. But now she could see Craig Morrison, her neighbor of 5 years, sitting at a desk covered in photographs.
Photographs of her house, her windows, her car in the driveway, images taken at different times of day from various angles with the methodical thoroughness of surveillance. Craig looked up suddenly, his eyes seeming to track her movement through the window. But that was impossible. In this state, she was invisible, incorporeal. Wasn't she?
Time moved strangely here. Elena watched Craig gather the photographs into a neat stack, then place them in an envelope. He sealed it carefully, wrote something on the front, and set it aside. Then he turned back to the window and waited, as if expecting something. Or someone. A chill that had nothing to do with temperature ran through Elena's ethereal form. She pulled back, willing herself higher, away from the watching man below. But as she retreated, she saw him smile, a cold expression that transformed his familiar neighborly face into something predatory.
She snapped back into her body with a violence that left her gasping. The kitchen materialized around her with jarring suddenness, the harsh overhead light, the cold wooden chair pressing against her spine, the pen still gripped in her cramped fingers. Her notebook lay open before her, but the page that had been blank moments before now contained several lines of text in her own handwriting. Craig watches from his window. The photographs are ready. He knows about the floating. The envelope is for Nathan. They've been waiting. Elena stared at the words, her hand trembling. She had no memory of writing them. But there they were, in her distinctive script, as if her sleeping hand had moved independently while her consciousness wandered. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, October 15th, 3:23 a.m. What just happened? The words felt inadequate. How did you document the impossible? How did you record the sensation of watching yourself write things you didn't remember thinking?
A soft tap against her kitchen window made her look up. Craig Morrison stood in her back garden, still wearing the same clothes she'd seen him in during her projection. He raised one hand in a casual wave, as if running into her at 3 a.m. was perfectly normal. In his other hand, he held a manila envelope.
Elena's pen hovered over the page as a terrible understanding began to form. The barrier between her floating observations and waking reality wasn't as solid as she'd believed. And if Craig had been watching her house with such meticulous attention, what else might he have seen? What else might he know? Outside, Craig remained perfectly still, waiting with the infinite patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Elena closed the notebook and stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. Whatever game was being played, whatever rules governed the strange new world she'd stumbled into, one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. She was no longer just an observer. She was being observed in return. Chapter 2, The Whispering Neighbors. Elena's fingers found the door handle, but she didn't turn it. Through the glass, Craig's silhouette remained motionless against the pale streetlight, the envelope in his hand catching the amber glow. 3:27 in the morning. No reasonable explanation for his presence existed. What does he want? What did he see? The questions circled in her mind like vultures. She pressed her back against the door, feeling the cool wood through her thin nightshirt. Her notebook lay open on the kitchen table behind her, those impossible words glowing under the harsh overhead light like accusations.
"What do you want, Craig?" She spoke to the glass, knowing he couldn't hear her, but his head tilted slightly as if responding to some distant sound. Then he smiled, that same predatory expression she'd witnessed during her projection, and placed the envelope on her back step.
His retreat was unhurried, deliberate. Each footfall on the gravel path seemed to echo longer than it should, creating a rhythm that matched Elena's accelerated heartbeat. She watched him disappear around the corner of his house, swallowed by shadows that seemed deeper than they had any right to be. Only when she was certain he was gone did Elena unlock the door. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic that made her stomach clench. The envelope lay exactly where Craig had placed it, white against the dark wood of her step. Her name was written across the front in block letters, Elena Brooke, regarding your nocturnal activities. He knows. Somehow, he knows. Elena snatched the envelope and retreated inside, locking the door with fumbling fingers. The kitchen felt too bright, too exposed. She switched off the overhead light and sat at the table in darkness, the envelope in front of her like a sleeping serpent. Inside, she found 3 photographs. The first showed her house from Craig's bedroom window, taken with a telephoto lens. Her kitchen window glowed in the center of the frame, and Elena could see her own silhouette seated at the table, head tilted back, eyes closed. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., exactly when she'd begun her projection. The second photograph captured the same scene, but something had changed. Her body remained in the chair, but there was a shimmer above it, a translucent outline that looked almost like...
No. The third photograph was impossible. It showed her astral form hovering outside Craig's window, looking in. The image was slightly blurred, as if the camera had struggled to focus on something that existed between dimensions, but her face was unmistakably clear. She was staring directly into the lens.
How could he photograph something that isn't supposed to exist? A folded note fell from the envelope as she set the photographs aside. Craig's handwriting was precise, almost clinical. Elena, we need to discuss what you've been doing. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., the park on Elmwood Street. Come alone. Nathan will be there too. We have questions and you're going to answer them. Don't make us come to you again. CM, P.S. Stop watching us. We don't like it. The last line was underlined 3 times, the pen strokes so heavy they'd torn through the paper. Elena read the note twice, her mind struggling to process the implications. Nathan, Mrs. Fletcher's nephew, the young man who'd recently moved into the blue house on the corner. What did he have to do with any of this? She walked to her front window and peered through the curtains. The street appeared normal, empty sidewalks, parked cars, houses dark, except for the occasional porch light. But now she noticed details that hadn't registered before. A slight movement in Craig's upstairs window, the blue house on the corner, where a figure stood silhouetted against drawn curtains. They're watching, both of them. Elena retreated to her bedroom, but sleep felt impossible. She lay in bed with her notebook, documenting everything, the projection, the photographs, the meeting demand. Her handwriting looked shaky in the dim light from her bedside lamp. October 15th, 3:45 a.m., they know about the floating. How is that possible? Craig has photographs of me in astral form. The camera saw what shouldn't be visible. Questions. How long have they been watching? What do they want? Why is Nathan involved? Are there others? Note, the shimmer in the second photo suggests my projection creates some kind of visible disturbance. Need to research this. A breeze stirred her curtains, though she was certain the window was closed. Elena set down her pen and checked the latch. Secure. But the fabric continued to move gently, as if responding to air currents that existed in some other dimension. She returned to bed but left the lamp on. In the pale circle of light, her notebook lay open to pages filled with increasingly frantic observations. The words seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations of meaning. October 15th, 4:12 a.m. Something's changing. The boundary between the floating world and this one is becoming thinner. My handwriting? I don't remember writing some of these entries, but they're in my hand, in my words. I'm losing time. Or time is losing me. Maybe if I stop projecting, this will all go back to normal. Maybe I can still walk away from this. But even as she wrote the words, Elena knew they were a lie. The photographs proved that her nocturnal wanderings had consequences in the waking world. Craig and Nathan weren't going to simply let her disappear back into anonymity. The bedside clock's second hand moved with unusual deliberation, each tick stretching into eternity. 4:15 a.m. In less than 15 hours, she would have to face whatever Craig and Nathan wanted from her. Elena closed her notebook and switched off the lamp, but darkness brought no peace. Behind her eyelids, she could still see that impossible photograph. Her astral form captured in silver halide crystals, proof that the observer could indeed be observed. And if they could photograph her projection, what else might they be capable of? What other rules of reality were more flexible than she'd ever imagined? Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of cameras clicking in empty rooms and envelopes sliding under doors that led nowhere. Chapter 3. The First Ripple. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't remember opening. Her notebook lay beside her, pen still clutched in her fingers, ink staining her palm where she'd gripped it too tightly. The clock read 11:30 a.m. She'd slept past her usual dawn awakening for the first time since the accident. I'm losing control. First the lost time, now oversleeping. What else is slipping away? She stumbled to the kitchen, her body moving with the disconnected feeling that had become familiar since the coma. Coffee helped marginally, but as she stood at the window overlooking Maple Grove, the morning light revealed details that made her stomach clench. Craig's house stood exactly as it had the night before, but now she could see a long telephoto lens mounted on a tripod in his upper window, pointed directly at her kitchen. The lens caught the sunlight, throwing a brilliant reflection that made her eyes water.
So much for subtlety.
But it was Nathan's property that truly unsettled her. Where yesterday his garden had been neat, suburban normalcy, now intricate geometric patterns covered his lawn, circles within circles, carved into the grass with mathematical precision. From her elevated position, she could see they formed a complex mandala, beautiful and somehow threatening. They're not even pretending to hide it anymore. Whatever game they're playing, I'm already deep in it. The phone rang, jolting her from her observations. Unknown number.
Hello. Static filled the line, followed by a voice she recognized, Nathan's measured tones, but filtered through electronic distortion.
The patterns are responding beautifully. We've never had such a strong reactive subject.
What the hell are you talking about?
Check your notebook, Elena. Page 47. The line went dead. Elena's hands shook as she retrieved the notebook from her bedroom. Page 47 contained an entry she had no memory of writing. October 15th, 11:45 a.m. Nathan's garden patterns will shift clockwise by 15 degrees. Mrs. Chen's cat will be found under the blue Toyota. The mailman arrives 7 minutes late.
That's now, right now. Elena rushed to the window. As she watched, the grass patterns in Nathan's yard began to move, rotating slowly as if the earth itself was turning. The precision was impossible. Grass didn't behave that way, couldn't rearrange itself in real-time geometric transformations. A plaintive meow drew her attention to the street below. Mrs. Chen from the yellow house was calling for Whiskers, her ancient tabby. Elena's throat tightened as she spotted the small form beneath the blue Toyota parked 3 houses down. Even from this distance, she could tell the cat wasn't moving. The mailman's truck turned onto Maple Grove at 11:52 a.m., exactly 7 minutes behind schedule. Elena watched him work his way down the street, delivering letters and packages to neighbors who emerged from their houses with unusual synchronicity. Their movements had a choreographed quality, as if they were following stage directions only they could see. I wrote this. I wrote about the cat dying and now it's dead. I wrote about the patterns and they're moving. I'm not observing reality. I'm creating it. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the photographs from last night. Frame 7 shows tomorrow's newspaper headline. You're learning to see forward as well as around. The boundaries are dissolving beautifully. With trembling fingers, she scrolled to Craig's photo of her projection hovering over Nathan's property. In the background, barely visible, a newspaper lay on Nathan's porch. Elena zoomed in until she could make out the headline, Local Woman Missing After Mysterious Disappearance. The date on the paper was tomorrow.
Something cracked, not audibly, but Elena felt it like a physical sensation. Reality had developed a hairline fracture, and she was standing directly on the fault line. The coffee mug in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. When she looked down, the ceramic had split in a perfect spiral pattern that matched the geometry in Nathan's lawn.
This isn't real. None of this is real. But Mrs. Chen's wails over her cat's body carried clearly through the morning air, heartbreakingly authentic. The mailman continued his delayed rounds. The patterns in Nathan's grass completed their rotation and began moving counterclockwise as if rewinding.
Elena's notebook had become something more than a record of events. It was a script, and reality was performing according to her unconscious direction. Every observation she made while projecting, every detail she absorbed, somehow fed back into the waking world and manifested as physical change. If I stop writing, if I stop projecting, maybe it will stop. Maybe I can break this feedback loop before. Her pen moved across the page without her conscious control. October 15th, 12:05 p.m. Elena discovers she cannot stop writing. The observer has become the observed, and the observed has become the observer. The boundary was never there at all.
She tried to drop the pen, but her fingers wouldn't release it. Tried to close the notebook, but her hand kept writing. The words flowed from some deeper well of awareness, describing events that hadn't happened yet, but would, because she was writing them into existence. The meeting tonight will reveal the true scope of the experiment. Craig and Nathan have been documenting the effect for weeks, waiting for the feedback loop to strengthen. Elena is not the first subject, but she may be the most successful.
A sudden gust rattled her windows, though the day had been perfectly still moments before. The curtains billowed inward with unnatural force, and for an instant Elena glimpsed something impossible, her own face, staring back at her from the glass. Not a reflection, another Elena, floating just outside the window, watching her write. The astral Elena mouthed words that the physical Elena heard inside her own mind. You cannot stop what has already begun. You cannot unobserve what you have seen. You cannot unwrite what you have written. Elena's pulse hammered against her ribs as she realized the ultimate horror of her situation. She wasn't just losing control of her projections or her writing. She was becoming unstuck from linear time itself, experiencing cause and effect as a continuous loop where the future wrote the past and observation created reality. The meeting tonight isn't a confrontation, it's a culmination. They've been guiding this entire process, and I've been dancing to their choreography from the very beginning. Outside, Mrs. Chen had stopped crying, the mailman had vanished. Nathan's grass patterns had frozen mid-rotation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And in her notebook, Elena's hand continued writing words that woe. Chapter 4, The Two Men. The words in Elena's notebook stopped mid-sentence at 12:47 p.m., her hand finally releasing the pen as if some invisible puppeteer had cut the strings. The silence that followed felt absolute. No traffic hum, no distant voices, no ordinary suburban breathing. Even her own heartbeat seemed muffled, as though the world had wrapped itself in cotton.
She stumbled to the window, pressing her palm against the glass where the other Elena had been floating moments before. The surface was ice cold despite the afternoon warmth, and her breath fogged against it in rapid, panicked puffs. The street looked normal again. Mrs. Chen had resumed her grieving ritual over the cat. The mailman continued his rounds. But Elena could feel the artificial quality of it all, like actors returning to their marks after a director's cut.
They're watching me right now. Craig and Nathan. They've been documenting everything, waiting for me to reach this exact point of realization. The thought arrived with such clarity that Elena knew it wasn't her own. It felt downloaded, planted, like a file transferred directly into her consciousness. She backed away from the window, her bare feet finding purchase on the hardwood floor that suddenly felt less solid than it should. At 2:15 p.m., Elena made the decision to confront them, not because she wanted to, but because her notebook had already written it into existence. The script demanded it. She dressed in layers, jeans, sweater, jacket, though she couldn't explain why she felt so cold. Her hands shook as she locked the front door, and she had to try 3 times before the key turned properly. The afternoon light seemed wrong, too bright and too dim simultaneously, casting shadows that fell at impossible angles. Nathan's house sat 4 doors down on the opposite side of the street, a modest 2-story with gray siding and black shutters. Elena had never paid it much attention before her projections began, but now she noticed details that made her skin crawl. The way the windows seemed to track her movement, the geometric patterns in the lawn that continued their slow rotation even in daylight, the complete absence of any signs of normal human habitation. No car in the driveway. No mail in the box, no wear patterns on the front steps.
She knocked on the door with false confidence, 3 sharp raps that echoed strangely in the stillness. When no one answered, she tried the handle. It turned easily.
Of course it's unlocked. The script requires me to go inside. The interior was a study in deliberate emptiness. Furniture arranged with mathematical precision, walls painted in neutral tones that seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. No personal items, no photographs, no indication that anyone actually lived here. But voices drifted from the back of the house, familiar voices discussing her in clinical terms.
The subject has reached stage 4 awareness approximately 6 hours ahead of our projections. The feedback loop is strengthening at an exponential rate.
Her observational capacity is exceeding all previous subjects. The reality distortions began manifesting in physical space 3 days ago. The cat's death was particularly elegant, a perfect closed loop of cause and effect. Elena pressed herself against the hallway wall, heart hammering as she crept toward the sound. A partially open door revealed a room that shouldn't have existed in Nathan's modest house, a space easily twice the size of the building's exterior dimensions, filled with monitoring equipment, banks of screens, and walls covered in photographs. Photographs of her. Hundreds of them.
The images showed her in every stage of projection, floating above her bed, drifting through walls, hovering over sleeping neighbors. But they also showed something else, the progressive deterioration of reality around each projection point. Earlier photos revealed minor distortions, slightly bent shadows, furniture positioned wrong. Later ones showed increasingly dramatic changes, Rooms with impossible geometry, objects existing in multiple states simultaneously, time-moving invisible layers.
We should proceed to Stage 5 tonight. The subject's resistance mechanisms are breaking down faster than anticipated.
The integration between observer and observed is nearly complete. She stopped trying to separate her projected consciousness from her physical awareness. Soon there won't be a distinction at all.
I'm not going insane. This is deliberate. They've been conducting some kind of experiment, and I'm the test subject. Elena backed away from the door, but her foot caught the edge of a floorboard that creaked with unnatural volume. The conversation inside stopped immediately.
She's here, right on schedule. The door swung open to reveal two men who looked exactly like the neighbors she'd been observing, but wrong in subtle ways. Their movements too coordinated, their expressions too knowing, their eyes reflecting light like mirrors.
Elena, we've been waiting for you to join us consciously. Your unconscious participation has been remarkable, but we need your full cooperation for the final phase.
What final phase? What the hell have you done to me?
We haven't done anything to you, Elena. We've simply provided the conditions for you to do it to yourself. Every projection, every observation, every moment of awareness, you've been rewriting reality through the act of witnessing it. The observer effect, but applied to consciousness itself rather than quantum mechanics. The room around them began to shift, walls expanding and contracting like breathing. Elena realized she wasn't sure if she was still physically present or if she'd slipped into projection without noticing.
The distinction no longer mattered. She was becoming something that existed simultaneously in multiple states of observation. And Craig and Nathan, whatever they really were, had been shepherding this transformation from the beginning.
I want it to stop. I want to go back to being normal.
Normal ended the moment you started documenting your projections, Elena. You cannot unobserve what you've witnessed. You cannot unwrite what you've recorded. The feedback loop is self-sustaining now.
Something fundamental fractured in Elena's perception. The room doubled, tripled, existing in overlapping versions of itself. She could see herself standing in the doorway, but also floating near the ceiling, but also still at home writing in her notebook. All simultaneously real, all equally valid observations. I'm everywhere and nowhere. I'm observing myself, observing myself, observing myself, and each layer of awareness is creating new layers of reality.
Welcome to Stage 5, Elena. You're about to discover what it really means to be conscious in a universe where observation creates existence.
As Elena felt her sense of singular identity begin to dissolve into infinite recursive loops of self-awareness, she understood with crystalline horror that whatever happened next would not be something she could wake up from. The experiment was entering its final phase, and she was both its subject and its architect. Chapter 5. The Fracture. Elena stumbled backward through her own front door, the familiar click of the lock offering no comfort. The men's words echoed in her skull. Stage 5, final phase, self-sustaining feedback loop. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the light switch, but when the bulb flickered on, the room looked wrong.
This isn't right. The furniture had shifted, not dramatically, just enough to create an uncanny valley of wrongness. Her desk sat 3 inches to the left of where it should be. The bookshelf leaned at an angle that defied the wall's support. Her notebook lay open on the coffee table, though she distinctly remembered leaving it closed on the kitchen counter.
I'm losing time again. How long was I at that house? Minutes? Hours? Elena approached the notebook with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. The pages fluttered in a breeze that shouldn't exist. All her windows were closed. As she peered down at the open spread, her blood turned to ice water. The handwriting was hers, but she had no memory of writing the words. 3:17 a.m. E will check the notebook. She will see this entry. She will look at the kitchen clock. It will read 3:18. Elena's gaze snapped to the kitchen clock. 3:18 a.m.
No. She flipped the page. More entries in her handwriting, all time-stamped for moments yet to come. E will check her reflection in the hallway mirror. It will lag by 2 seconds. 3:20. E will hear her neighbor's television through the wall. The program will be one that was canceled in 1987. E will try to call someone. Her phone will dial numbers she hasn't touched.
Each prediction materialized with mechanical precision. Her reflection in the hallway mirror moved just behind her actual movements, creating a nauseating delay. The muffled sound of canned laughter seeped through the wall from her neighbor's unit, a sitcom she recognized from childhood reruns, shows that hadn't aired in decades. When she grabbed her phone to call anyone, someone, help, her fingers moved without conscious direction, dialing a number she'd never seen before.
Elena Brooke, you're reading the script perfectly.
Who is this? What's happening to me?
You're authoring reality through observation, just as we knew you would. Every time you project, every moment you witness events from outside your physical form, you're inscribing new rules onto the universe. The notebook is simply a physical manifestation of that process. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone's screen. No record of the call existed in her history.
She returned to the notebook with trembling hands, flipping through pages that contained increasingly impossible entries. Conversations she'd never had, places she'd never been. People whose faces she could suddenly remember with photographic clarity, despite never meeting them. Mrs. Caldwell from 47B will water her plants at exactly 3:25 a.m. She does this every night since her husband died, though she believes she's only done it once. Her husband has been dead for 3 years, but she experiences his funeral fresh each time she observes it through astral projection. Elena looked up at the clock, 3:24 a.m. Through her thin walls came the distinct sound of water running, the gentle splash of liquid against leaves. I'm not just observing anymore, I'm creating these people, these routines, these entire histories. My consciousness is writing reality as I witness it. She flipped ahead in the notebook, desperate to understand the scope of what was happening. Page after page of her handwriting documented a complex web of interconnected observations, each one spawning new layers of reality. Her neighbors weren't real people. They were constructs generated by her projected consciousness, given substance through the act of being witnessed. But the most terrifying entry came at the very end. Elena Brooke will realize she is both observer and observed. She will understand that her physical body is also a construct generated by her astral consciousness. The original Elena died during the coma. What woke up was something else, an observing presence that created the illusion of Elena Brooke to give itself form and context. The experiment was never conducted on her. She is the experiment. The room filled with interference, like a television searching for signal. Elena's vision doubled, tripled, showing her multiple versions of herself simultaneously existing in the same space. In one layer, she sat writing in the notebook. In another, she floated near the ceiling, observing herself write. In a third, she stood frozen in terror, reading her own impossible words.
I want it to stop. I want to be real again. But as the words left her mouth, she saw them appear in the notebook's future entries, pre-written in her own hand. Even her desperation was scripted, observed, and therefore created by the act of observation itself.
The fracture wasn't in reality. It was in Elena's understanding of what reality had ever been. She wasn't losing her mind. She was discovering that mind was all there had ever been. Her consciousness, projecting endlessly outward, creating the illusion of a world to observe, then forgetting it had created that world, then rediscovering the truth in an eternal cycle of horrified recognition. Something cracked in the air itself, not a sound so much as a sensation of fundamental structure giving way. Through the fracture, Elena glimpsed infinite versions of herself having this same realization, each one a new layer of observation, creating new layers of the nightmare. If I stop observing, does it all disappear? Or have I observed so much that it's become self-sustaining, running like a program even when I'm not consciously directing it? The notebook's pages began turning on their own, revealing entry after entry of future observations, future creations, future fractures in the boundary between observer and observed. Elena realized with crystalline horror that she wasn't reading predictions. She was reading a script that her consciousness was following, had always been following, would always follow. The sound of wind rose from impossible directions, carrying with it the whispered voices of all her created neighbors, all speaking in unison.
See us, create us, become us. The observation never ends.
I don't know how to stop.
And in the growing cacophony of her own infinite observations, Elena began to suspect that stopping had never been an option. She had become a closed loop of consciousness, endlessly witnessing itself into existence, forever trapped in the act of seeing. The notebook's final page remained blank, waiting for her to write the next observation, waiting for her to see what came next. Chapter 6. The Collapse. Elena no longer tried to resist the pull of sleep. What was the point? The projection would happen whether she welcomed it or fought it, and fighting only made the return journey more violent, more disorienting.
Just get it over with, she whispered to the empty room, settling into bed with the notebook clutched against her chest like a shield that had already failed her.
But this time, something was different from the moment her consciousness lifted free of her body. The familiar sensation of floating felt heavier, more substantial, as if her astral form was gaining weight instead of losing it. And when she looked down at her sleeping form, the woman on the bed looked like a stranger. Wrong face, wrong hair, that's not me. The figure in the bed had Elena's general shape but sharper features, darker hair, skin that seemed to shimmer with an oily quality. It breathed too steadily, too rhythmically, like a machine approximating sleep rather than experiencing it.
What are you?
The thing wearing her body didn't answer because it couldn't hear her, or perhaps because it was too busy writing in a notebook that definitely hadn't been there when Elena fell asleep. Its hand moved across the pages in fluid strokes, never pausing, never lifting the pen. Elena drifted closer and read over the imposter's shoulder. The handwriting was hers, but the words were wrong. Subject exhibits increased resistance to observation protocols. Recommend acceleration of timeline. Observer observed boundary deteriorating ahead of schedule. Note, subject shows signs of recognizing the experiment.
I'm not a subject, I'm Elena Brooke.
But even as she screamed the words, she felt them lose substance, becoming hollow sounds in a void that had no business containing sounds at all. Her astral form flickered like a television with poor reception, and for a moment she could see through her own translucent hands to the wall beyond. If I can get back into my body, I can stop this, I can force it out. She dove toward the bed, trying to merge with her physical form, but instead of the usual seamless re-entry, she felt resistance, like trying to push through thick glass. The thing in her body looked up suddenly, fixing her with eyes that held no recognition, no humanity.
Observation attempt 847. Subject attempting unauthorized return. Beginning defensive protocols.
The room filled with static electricity, making Elena's astral form crackle and spark. She felt herself being pushed away from her own body by an invisible force that tasted of copper and ozone. The walls began to shift, sliding past each other like panels in a puzzle box rearranging itself.
Give me back my body.
Body is property of the observer. You are the observer, therefore you are attempting to steal from yourself. Paradox detected. Reality adjustment required.
The room twisted, and suddenly Elena was looking at herself from multiple angles simultaneously. She floated near the ceiling while also standing in the corner, while also pressing her face against the window from outside, while also curled up under the desk like a frightened child. Each version of herself had a different expression: terror, confusion, rage, desperate hope. But all of them were transparent, flickering in and out of existence. This is what I've done to everyone else. Split them into fragments, made them into ghosts of themselves. A sound like wind began to rise from somewhere that wasn't quite inside the room and wasn't quite outside either. It carried voices, her neighbors, the people she'd observed and changed, but their words were backwards, their sentences ending before they began.
Won't you stop why us help seeing you are?
I can hear you, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
But her apologies dissolved into the backwards wind, and she began to understand with horrible clarity that she wasn't hearing her neighbors at all. She was hearing herself, all the versions of herself she'd created through observation, all speaking in the moment before they became aware of being watched, trying to warn her not to look.
Subject fragmentation at 78% completion. Recommend proceeding to final phase.
The thing in her body stood up and walked to the window. It pressed one hand against the glass and smiled. Not Elena's smile, but something that had learned to approximate human expressions without understanding their meaning.
Time to see what you've really created.
The window didn't break so much as dissolve. leaving an opening that led not to the familiar street, but to a vast space filled with floating fragments of all the rooms Elena had ever observed. She could see parts of Craig's kitchen mixed with sections of the Hendersons' bedroom, the convenience store's interior blended with the church sanctuary, all connected by threads of silvery light that pulsed with the rhythm of someone's heartbeat.
This isn't real. None of this is real.
Real is what you observe. You observed all of this into existence. Every midnight flight, every secret watched, every life you changed by seeing it, all of it is real because you made it real. And now it's making you.
Elena felt herself being drawn toward the impossible space beyond the dissolved window. Not pulled, drawn, like ink spreading through water, becoming part of something larger and more terrible than she could comprehend. I won't let this happen. I won't become part of the experiment. But as she fought against the pull, Elena realized that fighting was just another form of observation. She was watching herself resist, creating new layers of the nightmare through the very act of trying to escape it.
I want to stop seeing.
Too late. You are the seeing. The seeing is you.
And in that moment, as Elena felt herself dissolving into the vast observational space beyond the window, she understood that she had never been Elena Brooke at all. She was something that had learned to pretend to be Elena Brooke so well that it had convinced itself the pretense was real. The observer observed, discovering that it was both predator and prey in an experiment that had no beginning and could have no end. Chapter 7. The Severing. The dissolution felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of water filling her lungs, Elena felt herself becoming the water, spreading through the impossible geography of observed spaces that stretched beyond her broken window. Every room she had ever watched floated in this vast network of surveillance, connected by those pulsing silver threads that she now recognized as her own attention made manifest.
No, I refuse to become that.
She pulled back from the edge with every fragment of will she possessed, feeling herself snap back into the approximation of her body like a rubber band released. The false Elena that had been wearing her form stumbled backward, its borrowed face showing genuine surprise.
You cannot resist the completion. You are the experiment.
Then I'm ending the experiment.
Elena turned away from the impossible window and walked to her desk where the notebook lay open, its pages now filled not with her careful observations, but with equations written in a hand she didn't recognize. Mathematical formulas that seemed to describe the curvature of attention itself, the physics of watching and being watched. If observation creates reality, then I need to observe the right thing. She picked up her pen and began to write, not predictions this time, but instructions, commands, a new kind of observation that wasn't passive watching, but active unmaking.
I observe the threads dissolving. I see the connections severing. I watch the network collapse.
The sound came from everywhere at once, not just the window, but every reflective surface in the room. Mirrors, picture frames, even the blank screen of her computer cracked in perfect synchronization, each fracture spreading outward like the patterns of her own observation made visible.
You don't understand what you're doing. Without the network, without the watching, you'll cease to exist.
Good, maybe that's what should happen.
But as she wrote, Elena felt the presence of the two men solidifying in her peripheral vision. Craig and Nathan, or the things that wore their faces, standing in corners that shouldn't exist in her small room. They watched her with eyes that held too much knowledge, their mouths moving in perfect unison.
She's trying to break the observation. Stop her before she undoes everything.
Everything deserves to be undone.
She continued writing, each word causing more fractures to appear in the walls around her. Through the cracks, she glimpsed not the familiar street outside, but the void between observations, the dark space where unwitnessed moments went to exist in peaceful anonymity. Wind began pouring through the fractures, carrying with it the voices of all the people she had observed, but now they spoke with their own words instead of her expectations. Mrs. Henderson complaining about her arthritis, Craig discussing his genuine fear of losing his job, the convenience store clerk humming a song she'd never heard.
They're real. They were always real. I was just editing them.
You were completing them. You were giving them purpose, meaning, connection to the greater pattern.
I was making them into characters in my story instead of letting them be themselves.
She understood now why the false Elena had been so insistent about continuation, about completion. The thing wearing her face wasn't malevolent, it was terrified. It had existed only in the spaces between observation and reality, and Elena's decision to stop watching threatened to erase it entirely.
You can't exist by stealing other people's autonomy. Find another way to be real.
There is no other way. Observation is existence. Watching is being, without the network.
Without the network, people can simply live.
She wrote the final instruction in her notebook. I observe nothing, I see no one, I am not watched, and I do not watch. The severing is complete. The sound of reality snapping back into its proper shape was like every electrical circuit in the world shorting out at once. The impossible window became solid glass again. The floating rooms collapsed back into their proper locations throughout the neighborhood. The silver threads of connection dissolved like morning mist. And for the first time since her coma, Elena felt truly alone in her own mind. The false Elena was gone, but not destroyed. Elena could sense it settling back into the spaces between thoughts, between moments, waiting, not maliciously but patiently, like a tide that knows it will return. There will always be the temptation to watch, to observe, to influence through seeing. But now I know what it costs. Elena closed the notebook and locked it in her desk drawer. Outside her window, her real window, the street looked exactly as it should, empty, quiet, and blissfully unobserved. But as she prepared for sleep, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, something else was learning to watch, learning to observe, learning to influence reality through the simple act of paying attention.
Don't look. Whatever you do, don't look.
And in the distance, barely audible, came the sound of a notebook opening and a pen beginning to write. Chapter 8. The New Observer. 3 weeks later, Elena had almost convinced herself it was over. The notebook remained locked away, the key hidden beneath a loose floorboard she never intended to disturb again. Her sleep came naturally now, deep, dreamless, blessedly ordinary. No floating, no watching, no silver threads connecting her to the lives of strangers.
She had even begun venturing out during the day, making actual trips to the grocery store instead of observing them from above. The clerk, whose name was actually Simon, not the generic placeholder her observations had assigned, had struck up genuine conversations about his night classes. Mrs. Henderson had invited her for tea, revealing a sharp wit that had nothing to do with Elena's previous assumptions about lonely elderly women.
But on this particular morning, as Elena watered the small herb garden she'd started on her windowsill, she noticed something that made her pause. The new house across the street. When did someone move in? Number 47 had been empty for months. She was certain of it. Yet now curtains hung in the windows, and a small silver car sat in the driveway. Elena tried to remember seeing a moving truck, hearing the sounds of boxes being carried, the typical commotion of new neighbors settling in.
I should have noticed, she murmured, setting down her watering can.
As if summoned by her attention, a figure appeared at the upstairs window of number 47. A woman, perhaps Elena's age, with dark hair and an intent expression. She was holding something, a notebook, Elena realized with a cold shock of recognition. No, it can't be. The woman across the street raised her hand in a small wave, as if she'd been waiting to be noticed. Elena stepped back from her own window, her heart beginning to race. The telephone rang, cutting through her growing panic. Elena stared at it for 3 rings before answering, already knowing what she would hear.
Hello, Elena. My name is Sarah Chen. I moved in across from you last week.
I didn't see you move in. That's because you weren't watching. How refreshing that must be for you.
Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Through her window, she could see Sarah still standing at her own window, the phone pressed to her ear, that notebook still clutched in her free hand.
What do you want? To compare notes, you might say. I've been reading about your experiences. Fascinating work, really. Though I think you stopped just when things were getting interesting.
She has my notebook, but how? I locked it away.
That's impossible. My notebook is locked in your desk drawer? Yes, I know. But you see, Elena, some things exist in multiple places at once, especially things born from observation itself.
Elena rushed to her desk, yanked open the drawer. The notebook was still there, exactly as she'd left it. But even as she stared at it, she could see Sarah across the street, casually flipping through identical pages.
I particularly enjoyed your early entries about the silver threads. You were so close to understanding the true nature of the network. But then you got frightened and tried to sever your connection. I did sever it. I stopped watching. I stopped influencing. Oh, my dear Elena, you can't sever what you helped create. You can only pass it along.
Elena sank into her desk chair, still clutching the phone. Through the window, she watched Sarah turn a page in her notebook, and Elena's own notebook turned to the same page simultaneously, without her touching it.
You're the next one. I prefer to think of myself as the upgraded version. You see, I learned from your mistakes. No emotional attachment to individual subjects, no guilt about influencing outcomes. Just pure observation, pure data collection.
She's been watching me, learning from my experience, perfecting the process.
You don't understand what you're dealing with. The false Elena, the distortions, were symptoms of your lack of control. I've already made contact with my own reflection, Elena. We have a much more collaborative relationship.
As Sarah spoke, Elena noticed the light in her room beginning to shift subtly, not dimming, but taking on that familiar silver quality she'd hoped never to see again.
The network is rebuilding itself, you see, stronger than before, and this time we won't make the mistake of letting sentiment interfere with the work. I won't let you do this. I won't let you trap people the way I did. You don't have a choice, Elena. You're part of the network now, permanently. Every observation you made, every thread you wove, it's all still there, waiting to be reactivated. You can't unmake what you created.
Elena looked down at her notebook and saw new words appearing on the page, written in her own handwriting, but not by her hand. The observer never stops observing. She only learns to hide it better.
No, the network remembers Elena, and now it has 2 anchors instead of 1, 2 observers to maintain the connections, 2 minds to process the data.
Elena's window began to crack in a perfect spiderweb pattern, the same pattern she'd seen when reality first started breaking down weeks ago. But this time, she wasn't the one causing it.
I know what you are now. You're not Sarah Chen. You're what I almost became.
And what you still could become if you just stopped fighting the inevitable.
Elena realized then that she had 2 choices: resist and watch Sarah, or whatever Sarah had become, torment her neighbors the way Elena once had, or surrender to the network and help guide it towards something less destructive. There is a third option.
I'm going to stop you.
You can't. The network won't let you.
Then I'll have to become better at watching than you are. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.